Ambassador had lived for 600 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched stars die and new worlds be born. He had survived 3 galactic wars and witnessed the signing of peace treaties that shaped the fate of billions. But in all his centuries of life, nothing made his blood run cold quite like the 5 words he heard today. The Galactic Council chamber was chaos. Representatives from 3 powerful species were screaming at each other across the great circular hall. The Federation had accused the collective of stealing their mining rights in the system. They had responded by threatening to destroy every outpost in the sector. And the Dominion, caught in the middle, had declared that they would go to war against whoever fired the first shot. Sat in his elevated seat, watching the disaster unfold with tired eyes. His scales, once bright green, had faded to a dull gray over the centuries. He had seen this before. He had seen species tear each other apart over rocks and gas and pride. He knew how this would end. Millions would die, worlds would burn, and in 100 years no one would even remember why the war started. High Chancellor, the leader of the, slammed his 4 arms on the council table. "This is your final warning," he clicked in his sharp, buzzing voice. "Stand down your fleets or face the consequences." The ambassador, a massive creature with 6 arms and armored skin, laughed bitterly. "You threaten us. We will crush you both and take what is rightfully ours." The representative, a tall avian being with golden feathers, spread her wings in a gesture of fury. "Then let the stars witness our war. We will not back down." Closed his eyes. He had tried to mediate. He had spent weeks trying to find a peaceful solution. But pride was a disease that infected all species, and these 3 had been sick with it for far too long. And then he heard it. A soft voice, a calm voice, a human voice. "Just leave it to me." The chamber fell silent. Every representative, every diplomat, every observer stopped moving. It was as if time itself had frozen. Opened his eyes and looked down at the human section of the council. Danny Cole stood there. He was not a large man. He was average height, with brown hair that was starting to gray at the temples and kind eyes that had seen too much. He wore the simple blue uniform of a human diplomat, with no medals or decorations. He looked like nothing special. He looked like someone you would pass on the street without a second glance. But he had said the words. Felt his old heart begin to beat faster. Around the chamber he could see the reactions of those who understood. The elder representatives, the ones who had lived long enough to know, were backing away slowly. Some were trembling. A diplomat, her crystalline body usually so steady, was shaking so hard that she chimed like a bell. High Chancellor looked confused. He was young for a leader, only 200 years old. He did not understand. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Who is this human? Why does everyone look so afraid?" The ambassador had gone pale. His 6 arms hung limp at his sides. "You fool," he whispered. "You young fool, do you not know what those words mean?" "They are just words," insisted, but his voice had lost its confidence. Rose from his seat. His old bones ached, but he forced himself to stand tall. "They are not just words," he said, and his voice carried across the silent chamber. "They are a promise. And when a human makes that promise, the galaxy has learned to listen." Danny Cole had not moved. He stood calmly, his hands folded in front of him, waiting. There was no arrogance in his posture, no pride, just quiet certainty. Looked around the chamber, seeing the fear on faces of species who had conquered star systems. "I do not understand. They are humans. They are small. They are weak. Their empire is barely 300 years old. Why should we fear them?" Walked slowly down from his seat, his claws clicking on the stone floor. He stopped in front of the young chancellor and looked at him with ancient, knowing eyes. "I was there," said softly. 250 years ago on Prime, I watched a single human woman save 2 million lives when every computer, every scientist, every mind in the galaxy said it was impossible. She said those words, 'Leave it to me.' And she did the impossible." He turned to look at Danny Cole, who gave him a small nod of recognition. "I was there," continued, "when the news reached us of Captain and the Starling, stranded in the dead zone with no hope of rescue. He said those words, and he brought 200 souls home when physics itself said they should have died." His voice grew heavy with memory, and I watched the broadcast from Sanctuary, one human woman standing against an army of 10,000 protecting 400 children. She said those words, and an empire fell because of her promise. The chamber was absolutely still. Even the air seemed to have stopped moving. "Humans do not make promises the way we do," said. "When we promise something, we mean we will try. When humans say leave it to me, they mean it will be done. Failure is not something they consider. They will break their bodies. They will sacrifice everything. They will bend the laws of nature itself, but they will keep their word." He looked at Danny Cole, and for a moment, two very different beings shared an understanding that crossed all barriers of species and culture. "So when a human says those words, finished, the wise thing to do is exactly what they ask. You leave it to them, and then you watch as the impossible becomes real." High Chancellor swallowed hard. The ambassador had sat down, his aggression completely gone. The representative had folded her wings tight against her body. Danny Cole smiled softly. "I will need a shuttle," he said, "and 3 days, that is all." No one objected. No one argued. No one asked how one human diplomat planned to stop a three-way war that had been building for centuries. Because they had heard the words, and the galaxy had learned, through blood and fire and miracle after miracle, exactly what those words meant. Returned to his seat and watched Danny Cole leave the chamber. And despite everything he had seen in 600 years of life, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. 250 years before Danny Cole silenced the Galactic Council, a young diplomat named arrived on Prime for what should have been a simple trade negotiation. He was only 350 years old then, still considered young by his people's standards. His scales were bright green, his eyes were sharp, and he believed he understood how the universe worked. He was wrong. Prime was a mining colony built around a massive energy reactor. 2 million beings lived there, representing dozens of species. The reactor provided power not just to the colony but to 17 nearby systems. It was considered one of the engineering marvels of the age, designed by the greatest scientists and built to last for 10,000 years. It failed on the 3rd day of its visit. The alarm started at midnight. Was awakened by Commander, the six-armed who ran the station. The commander's usually calm face was twisted with terror. "The primary reactor core is failing," said. "Complete meltdown in 6 hours. We cannot stop it." Did not understand at first. "Then evacuate," he said. "There is no time. The transport ships can carry perhaps 50,000. We have 2 million. Arms trembled. "We are going to die, all of us." The next few hours were the worst of his life. He watched as the greatest engineers in the sector tried everything they could think of. The scientists ran simulation after simulation, but every result was the same. The technical team offered their expertise, but they had no solutions. The reactor core had reached a point of no return. There was nothing anyone could do. Stood in the command center and watched beings of a dozen species weep, pray, and say goodbye to loved ones through communication screens. Families held each other. Parents tried to comfort children who did not understand why everyone was crying. And then he noticed the human. She was sitting alone at a terminal in the corner of the command center. Her name tag said Lieutenant Morgan, Engineering Division. She was young, maybe 28 years old by human standards, with short red hair and freckles across her nose. She was small, even by human standards, and she was reading through data on her screen with an expression of intense focus. Chief Scientist, an old with faded scales, noticed her too. He walked over with a look of pity on his face. "You should be with your people," he said gently. spending your final hours with loved ones. Did not look up. I am looking for a solution. Sighed, child, there is no solution. Our greatest minds have confirmed this. The reactor will explode. Nothing can change that. Finally looked up. Her eyes were calm, steady. There is always a solution, she said. Sometimes it is just hiding where no one thinks to look. Shook his head and walked away, watched the exchange with curiosity. He had never spent much time around humans before. They had only joined the Galactic Union 50 years ago and were still considered newcomers. Young, inexperienced, not particularly remarkable. Continued working. An hour passed. Then, too, other beings had stopped trying. They had accepted death. But the human kept reading, kept typing, kept searching. And then she stopped. She stood up slowly. Her face had changed. There was something in her eyes that could not identify. It was not hope. It was something harder, something more certain. She walked to Commander, who was sitting with his head in his hands. I found a way, she said. Looked up. What? There is a way to stop the meltdown. It is difficult. It will require someone to manually reconfigure the core from inside the reactor chamber. The radiation will be intense, but it can be done. Overheard and rushed over. That is impossible. The radiation levels inside the core chamber would kill any being in minutes. No species can survive that environment. Humans can, said quietly. We will not survive it well, but we can survive it long enough. Stepped closer, drawn by something he did not understand. Shook his head. Even if a human could survive the radiation, the reconfiguration process would take at least 70 hours of continuous work. No being can work for 70 hours without rest. Smiled. It was a small, sad smile. You do not know humans very well. She turned to face the room. 2 million lives hung in the balance. Every being in the command center was watching her now. This small, young, unremarkable human. Leave it to me, she said. The words were quiet, almost a whisper, but felt something strange when he heard them. A shiver ran down his spine. He did not know why. Suited up and entered the reactor chamber at hour 1. The radiation alarms screamed warnings that would have made any sane being turn back. She ignored them and went inside. She worked for 72 hours straight. Stayed in the command center the entire time, watching the video feed from the reactor chamber. He watched as crawled through tunnels filled with deadly energy. He watched as her suit began to fail and burns appeared on her skin. He watched as she kept working, even when her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her tools. She did not stop, she did not rest, she did not eat or drink, she simply worked. At hour 40, her voice came through the radio, core stabilization at 40%, continuing. At hour 60, she was barely able to speak. Her voice was a rough whisper, 70%, almost there. At hour 71, she collapsed. The command center went silent. Everyone thought she was dead. But then she moved. She crawled on her hands and knees to the final control panel. She pulled herself up with arms that should not have had any strength left. At hour 72, her voice came through one last time. Done. The reactor stabilized. 2 million lives were saved, and Morgan was pulled from the chamber more dead than alive. Visited her in the medical bay 3 weeks later. The doctors said she would survive, but the radiation had her permanently. Half her face was covered in burns that would never fully heal. Her hands shook constantly. Why? Asked her. Why did you do this to yourself? Looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Because I said I would. Did not understand, not then. But you could have died, you almost did die. Smiled, and even with her scars, it was a beautiful smile. When I said leave it to me, I was not asking for permission. I was not expressing hope. I was telling you what was going to happen. 2 million people were not going to die. That was simply not acceptable. She looked out the window at the colony she had saved. Humans do not make promises we are not willing to die for. So when we say leave it to me, we mean exactly that. Leave it to us, because we will find a way. We always find a way. Left Prime a changed being. He had arrived thinking he understood the universe. He left knowing that he had only begun to learn. And he never forgot those words, or the small human woman who taught him what they truly meant. The research vessel Starling was 3 weeks into a scientific mission when the universe decided to test the limits of human will. Captain Greg was 45 years old, with gray at his temples and lines on his face that spoke of hard decisions and sleepless nights. He had commanded ships for 20 years, and he had never lost a crew member. It was a record he was proud of, a record he intended to keep. The Starling carried 200 souls, 50 humans and 150 beings from a dozen other species, scientists, engineers, doctors, and explorers. They had been sent to study an unusual energy reading at the edge of known space. What they found was a nightmare. The dead zone appeared without warning. One moment they were traveling through normal space, and the next they were surrounded by absolute darkness. The stars vanished. The engines died. Communications went silent. Every system on the ship failed except for basic life support. Doctor, a biologist with delicate wings and compound eyes, was the first to understand what had happened. "We are trapped in a spatial anomaly," she explained to the crew gathered in the main hall. "An area where the normal laws of physics do not apply. Our engines cannot function here. Our signals cannot escape. We are completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy." Navigator, with silver feathers, studied the data with growing despair. "The anomaly extends for millions of kilometers in every direction. Even if we could move, we would never find the edge before our supplies ran out." "How long do we have?" asked Greg. His feathers flattened against his body, a sign of deep distress. 30 days, perhaps less. The news spread through the ship like a disease. Within hours, the crew had divided into 2 groups, those who panicked and those who had already given up. Greg walked through the corridors and watched his crew fall apart. A group of scientists were performing death rituals, their crystalline bodies humming with mournful frequencies. Several engineers had locked themselves in their quarters, refusing to come out. A young doctor sat alone, staring at nothing. He found Doctor in the observation deck, looking out at the empty darkness. "In my culture," she said without turning around, "we believe that when we die, our spirits fly through the stars until we find our home world again. But there are no stars here. If we die in this place, our spirits will be lost forever." Greg stood beside her. "You are not going to die here." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are kind, Captain, but we both know that is impossible. The mathematics are clear. There is no escape." Greg was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the same strange certainty that would later learn to recognize. "I will get you home, all of you. Leave it to me." Turned to look at him. She had worked with humans for years, but she had never heard those words spoken quite like that before. There was no doubt in his voice. No false hope, just simple, absolute certainty. "How?" she asked. "I do not know yet," Greg admitted, "but I will find a way." For the next 2 weeks, Greg barely slept. He studied the anomaly. He ran calculations. He tested theories. He failed again and again, but he never stopped trying. The crew watched him work. At first, they thought he was in denial. Then they thought he was going mad, but slowly something changed. They started to believe. Was the first to join him, then Doctor, then others. The crew stopped preparing for death and started fighting for life. On day 18, Greg called everyone to the main hall. "I found a way out," he said. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, and he had lost weight he could not afford to lose, but his voice was strong. "The anomaly is not perfect. There is a weakness, a thin spot where the boundary between normal space and this dead zone becomes unstable. If we can reach it, we can break through." Studied the data. "Captain, This path takes us through the most dangerous part of the anomaly. The energy fluctuations there would tear the ship apart. If I pilot us through manually, I can adjust our course fast enough to avoid the worst of the damage. That is impossible. The reaction time required would be beyond any computer. No being could process information that quickly. Greg smiled tiredly. No alien being, maybe, but humans have a trick. When our lives depend on it, when the people we care about are in danger, we can do things that should not be possible. We call it adrenaline. I call it determination. The crew looked at each other. They did not fully understand, but they had learned something important over the past 18 days. When a human said they would do something, they meant it. "What do you need from us?" asked. "Trust," Greg said, "and someone to catch me when this is over, because I am going to be very tired." The next 12 hours were the most intense of Greg's life. He sat at the pilot's console, his hands moving faster than thought, guiding the damaged ship through a maze of invisible death. Energy bursts exploded around them. The hull groaned and screamed. Twice, the ship spun completely out of control, and twice, Greg brought it back. He did not eat. He did not drink. He did not even blink. Every cell in his body was focused on one thing, keeping his promise. At hour 11, the ship broke through the boundary. Stars appeared in the viewports. Normal space surrounded them once again. A rescue fleet, drawn by the single burst transmission Greg had sent before entering the path, found them exactly where he had calculated they would emerge. Greg stood up from the console, smiled at his crew, and collapsed. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed on a space station, was sitting beside him. "The doctors say you should be dead," she said. "Your body was running on nothing but will for the last 12 hours. They have never seen anything like it." Greg smiled weakly. "I told you I would get you home." News of the Starlings' escape spread across the galaxy. Reporters asked Greg how he had done the impossible. His answer became famous. "I told my crew I would handle it. A human does not lie about that. We do not know how to." Later wrote in her memoirs, "I have studied many species, but I have never found one quite like humans. They are not the strongest or the most advanced. But when they decide something will happen, the universe itself seems to bend around their will. I do not know if this is a gift or a madness. Perhaps it is both." The story of Captain Greg joined the story of Morgan in galactic memory. And slowly, species across the stars began to understand what those 5 words truly meant when spoken by a human. "Leave it to me." Not a request, not a hope, a promise written in human bone and blood and will. 90 years before Danny Cole spoke to the Galactic Council, a woman named Amy stood alone against an army. The world was called Sanctuary. It was a neutral planet protected by galactic law, where refugees from 100 different conflicts could find safety. No weapons were allowed on Sanctuary. No armies. No violence. It was supposed to be the one place in the universe where the innocent could live without fear. The Dominion did not care about galactic law. They were conquerors. They had destroyed 30 civilizations in their rise to power, and they believed that strength was the only truth that mattered. When they arrived at Sanctuary with a fleet of warships and an army of 10,000 soldiers, they came to take what they wanted. And what they wanted were slaves. Amy was 34 years old. She had been a nurse on Earth before joining the Galactic Medical Corps. For the past 5 years, she had run an orphanage on Sanctuary, caring for children who had lost everything to war and disaster. 400 children from 12 different species lived under her care, crystals who chimed when they laughed, hatchlings who liked to climb on her shoulders, larvae who needed special nutrients she mixed herself every morning, younglings who pretended to be tough but still asked for bedtime stories. They were her children, all of them. When the invasion began, the defenders of Sanctuary fought bravely, but they were not warriors. They were doctors and teachers and aid workers. They fell quickly. Amy gathered her children in the main hall of the orphanage and tried to keep them calm while the sounds of battle grew closer. She told them stories. She sang songs. She promised them that everything would be all right. She did not know if that was true, but she knew she would die before she let anyone hurt them. By sunset, the battle was over. The defenders were dead or fled. And General, the warlord leading the invasion, stood at the gates of the orphanage with 10,000 soldiers behind him. Amy walked outside to meet him. Was massive, even by standards. He stood 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and skin like dark armor. His eyes glowed red with the fire that burned inside all. He looked down at Amy and laughed. This is what defends the children, one small human female. These children are not slaves, Amy said. Her voice was steady. They are under the protection of galactic law. Galactic law means nothing to the Dominion, gestured at his army. I have 10,000 warriors, you have nothing. Give me the children and I will let you live. Amy did not move. No. His eyes narrowed. You would die for alien children. They are not even your species. They are my children, Amy said simply. Species does not matter. Elder, an ancient whose crystalline body had survived 3 wars, watched from inside the orphanage. He had seen many things in his long life, but he had never seen a being stand so calmly before certain death. Took a step forward. Last chance, human. Move aside or I will crush you where you stand. Amy looked up at the monster before her. She thought about the 400 children behind her, the twins who called her mama, the little girl who was afraid of the dark, the boy who had nightmares about the war that killed his parents. And she spoke 5 words that would change the galaxy forever. These children are mine. Leave them to me. Laughed again, but somewhere in the back of his mind something stirred, a warning he did not understand. He had heard stories about humans, strange stories, stories that did not make sense. You have lost your mind, he said. What can one human do against an army? Amy reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. This is a broadcast unit. It is connected to every news network in the galaxy. I activated it when you arrived. She pointed to a small drone hovering overhead. Everything that happens here is being watched by billions of beings across 1,000 worlds. Looked at the drone, then back at Amy. So they will watch you die. What difference does it make? They will watch what you do to innocent children, Amy said. And they will remember. Is that the legacy you want for the Dominion? To be known as the monsters who enslaved orphans while the galaxy watched? For the first time, hesitated. They were cruel, but they were not stupid. They knew that some victories cost more than they were worth. You are bluffing, said, but he did not sound certain anymore. Maybe, Amy said. Or maybe I sent a signal to the human colonies before you jammed communications. Maybe right now, human warships are racing towards sanctuary at speeds that should not be possible. Maybe they will be here in hours. Impossible. The nearest human colony is 3 days away at maximum speed. Amy smiled. You do not know humans very well. She turned her back on the army of 10,000 and walked to the orphanage door. She sat down on the steps and looked at the children watching through the windows. I am going to stay right here, she said, loud enough for to hear. I made a promise to these children. I told them they would be safe, and I do not break my promises. Hours passed, ordered his soldiers to surround the orphanage, but he did not attack. The broadcast continued. Billions watched across the galaxy. And somewhere in the void, 17 human warships pushed their engines beyond all safe limits, traveling faster than physics said they could. 6 hours after Amy sat down on those steps, the sky above Sanctuary lit up with new stars. The human fleet arrived like a storm of fire and steel. They were not supposed to be there. They could not be there. The journey should have taken 3 days. They made it in 6 hours. The battle was short and brutal. They had never fought humans before. They had heard the stories, but they had not believed them. They believed them now. General stood before his burning fleet and watched as human soldiers, outnumbered 50-1, tore through his army like it was made of paper. They were not fighting for territory or resources or power. They were fighting for 400 children and the woman who had promised to protect them. There is no force in the universe more dangerous than that. When it was over, a human commander approached Amy, who had not moved from the steps throughout the entire battle. "How did you know we would come?" he asked. Amy looked at him with tired eyes. "I did not know, but I promised those children they would be safe, so either you would come or I would find another way. There was no third option." The commander smiled. He understood. All humans understood. Elder recorded the events of that day in the great crystal of memory, where kept their most important histories. His words were later translated and shared across the galaxy. "I have lived for 1,000 years. I have seen heroes and cowards, saints and monsters, but I have never seen anything like Amy. She stood against an army with nothing but a promise and her own will, and the universe bent around her because it knew that she would not break. When humans say, 'Leave it to me,' they are not asking for faith. They are warning you that they will not fail no matter the cost. Believe them. The galaxy has learned to believe them." Amy stayed on Sanctuary for the rest of her life. She raised those 400 children, and then more children after them. She became known as the Mother of Sanctuary, and every year beings from across the galaxy came to visit her and to hear the story of the day one human woman stopped a war. And the phrase spread further still. "Leave it to me." 5 words that could freeze armies and calm storms. 5 words that meant more than any promise in any language in the galaxy. Because humans kept them. Always, Danny Cole's shuttle was small and unarmed. It floated through the darkness of the system like a leaf in a storm. Around him, 3 massive fleets faced each other across the void. The Federation had brought 200 warships, their hulls gleaming gold in the starlight. The Collective had assembled 300 vessels, bristling with weapons that could crack planets in half. The Dominion had deployed their entire battle fleet, 400 ships strong, each one carrying enough firepower to end civilizations. 900 warships, millions of soldiers, centuries of hatred and pride ready to explode into the bloodiest war the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. And in the middle of it all, one human in a tiny shuttle. Danny opened a communication channel to all 3 fleets. His face appeared on every screen in every ship across the entire system. "My name is Danny Cole," he said. His voice was calm and clear. "I am here to solve this. Leave it to me." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, weapons began to power down across all 3 fleets, not because anyone ordered it, not because anyone believed peace was possible, but because everyone had heard the stories. Everyone knew what those words meant when a human spoke them. Danny spent the next 3 days moving between the 3 flagships. He met with Commander of a fierce warrior whose golden feathers were streaked with the white of age and battle. He sat with High General of a massive being whose 6 arms bore the scars of 50 wars. He faced High Chancellor of whose compound eyes watched everything with cold calculation. Each leader told him the same thing. Peace was impossible. The other sides were too proud, too angry, too committed to war. History had made enemies of them, and history could not be changed. Danny listened, he asked questions, he took notes, and he did not sleep. On the second day, he found what he was looking for. The war was not about the system. It had never been about the system. 300 years ago, before any of the current leaders were born, an exploration ship had discovered an ancient artifact on a colony world. They had accused of theft. They had it. They had been caught in the middle, and when they tried to mediate, both sides had accused them of favoring the other. 3 centuries of anger and suspicion had grown from that single misunderstanding, and the artifact itself had been lost in the chaos. forgotten by everyone except the historians who recorded it. Danny found the artifact. It took him 18 hours of searching through ancient records and forgotten archives, but he found it. It was sitting in a museum on a neutral world, labeled as Origin Unknown, because no one remembered how it got there. On the third day, he called all three leaders to his shuttle. "I know why you hate each other," he said. He placed the ancient artifact on the table between them. "And I know that none of you remember the real reason anymore." He told them the story. He showed them the records. He watched as three beings who had spent their lives preparing for war realized that they had been fighting over something that no longer existed. "The past cannot be changed," Danny said, "but the future can. The system has resources that all three of your peoples need. Instead of fighting over it, share it, rotating governance with each species taking control for 5 years at a time. Your children can grow up as neighbors instead of enemies." Commander's feathers ruffled with emotion. "How do we know the others will honor this agreement?" Danny looked at her. "Because I give you my word that I will hold all three sides accountable. If anyone breaks this peace, I will know, and I will be back." High General laughed, but there was respect in his voice. "You would stand against our fleets alone." "I would do whatever it takes," Danny said simply. "That is what humans do." High Chancellor studied Danny for a long moment. "You have not slept in 3 days. You have eaten almost nothing. You have pushed yourself to exhaustion to solve a problem that is not yours. Why?" Danny smiled tiredly. "Because I said I would. Because when I spoke those words in the council chamber, I was not making a request. I was telling you what was going to happen. This war was going to end. I was going to end it. There was no other outcome I was willing to accept." The three leaders looked at each other. They had heard the stories all their lives: Morgan and the reactor, Greg and the starling, Amy and the children of Sanctuary. They had always thought the stories were exaggerated, legends that had grown larger than truth. Now they understood. The stories were not large enough. The peace treaty was signed that evening. 3 species who had been ready to annihilate each other agreed to share a star system and build a future together. It was not a perfect solution. It would take years of work to heal centuries of distrust, but it was a beginning. Danny returned to the Galactic Council 2 days later. He walked into the chamber looking like a man who had not slept in a week, which was accurate. His uniform was wrinkled. His hair was a mess. He had dark circles under his eyes that might never fully disappear. But he was smiling. Ambassador rose from his seat and walked down to meet him. The ancient, who had spent 600 years watching the galaxy, who had seen Morgan save 2 million lives and heard the stories of Greg and Amy, looked at this ordinary human with something like wonder. "You did it," said. "You stopped a war that everyone said was inevitable." "I said I would," Danny replied. "But how? How do humans do this? How do you keep these impossible promises?" Danny was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something that was so fundamental to his species that he had never needed to put it into words. "When we say leave it to me," he finally said, "we are not asking for trust. We are not expressing hope. We are telling you what will happen. Failure is not an option we consider. It is not a path that exists in our minds. When we make that promise, we commit everything we are to keeping it, our bodies, our minds, our lives if necessary." He looked at with eyes that held the same quiet certainty that Morgan had shown, that Greg had carried, that Amy had worn like armor. "We do not know how to give up," Danny said. "I think maybe that is our greatest gift or our greatest curse. Either way, it is who we are." Nodded slowly. He had lived for 600 years, and he had finally found the words he had been searching for since Prime. That night he sat down to write his memoirs. He wrote about the council session, about Danny Cole, about the peace treaty that had seemed impossible until it was not. And at the end he wrote, "I have studied humans for 250 years. I have watched them do things that should not be possible. I have seen them break their bodies saving strangers and destroy armies protecting children, and I have finally understood the truth about them. Other species make promises, humans make certainties. When they whisper those 5 words, "Leave it to me," even the stars hold their breath, because they know that whatever comes next will be remembered for eternity. The galaxy learned long ago. When a human says, "Leave it to me," you do exactly that. You leave it to them, and then you watch as the impossible becomes inevitable. Because that is what humans do. They take the impossible and make it real, one promise at a time. Set down his pen and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Danny Cole was probably already finding another problem to solve, another promise to keep. And the old smiled, because for the first time in centuries, he felt certain that the galaxy was in good hands. Human hands,